Hi everyone. So today we're going to be looking at the October-November 2016 multiple choice paper. I hope you found this okay. I'll just do a brief 20, 30-minute run through each question, and let me know if you need any more clarification on anything further. Okay, so question one. Oh, we're looking at the idea of economic efficiency, and I think this is quite a simple question. It's essentially the reason why we seek economic efficiency is to make sure, given the resources that we have, they're being used in the best possible way, i.e., that the efficiency is being maximized, which leads to the answer C. They're not being wasted. It's not to do with quantity of resources. It's to do with, given the resources that we have, can we use them in the best possible way by there being no wastage. So the answer to one is C. Looking at question two, it's a follow-on sort of from question one as to how economic efficiency is affected by this increase in output from OY to OZ. The answer in this case is B, because if we look at the graph, the average revenue curve is actually synonymous with the demand curve for the firm's good or the industry, and similarly the marginal cost curve can be thought of as the supply curve. And as we move from OY to OZ, the price in this case falls, and the price moves closer to the point at which the AR curve intersects with the MC curve. And if you think of AR as demand, MC as supply, this intersection point is the equilibrium price, or the price at which economic efficiency is maximized. And therefore, as the quantity increases, the price falls, and the price therefore reaches a closer point to this efficient level. And therefore, it's the idea of B, where the increase in quantity means that the value at which the price at which consumers value the good, reflected by the point of intersection of Y and Z respectively on the AR curve, falls, and therefore becomes closer to the marginal cost, which is the point at which Y and Z intersects with the MC curve. And at this intersection point that I mentioned, the marginal value the consumer places on the good equals the marginal cost of producing it, and that's the point of economic efficiency. So we're moving closer as we go from Y to Z. Okay, part C is quite simple. It's just basic addition using cost-benefit analysis. So we know the new power plant was rejected by the government, which implies that total sort of social cost should be greater than social benefits. And we know that the social cost is the private cost plus the external cost, and the social benefit is the private benefit plus external benefits. So we can see that the social benefits is $900 million plus $200 million, $1,200 million. And we know that the social cost exceeds social benefits, so social cost must exceed $1,200 million. Therefore, we know the external cost must exceed $400 million. Answer B. Okay, question four. You can get it's easy to get quite confused on this one, but if you just think of it through, the answer is quite straightforward. It's essentially B, because it's mapping, like, say, an individual consumer's demand curve, and the demand, it's essentially implying the demand curve, because the demand curve is downward sloping. A fall in price will lead to a rise in the quantity that consumer would buy. So it's a movement along the demand curve, i.e., in this case, B. It's not necessarily a fall in total utility. In fact, it's most likely to be a rise in total utility, and you can't necessarily speculate on the marginal. In fact, it's more likely to be a fall in marginal utility. So actually, A and C are most likely to be wrong. D is definitely wrong. So the answer is B in this case. Okay, question five. It's looking at some indifference curve analysis, and we're saying there's initially the consumer consumes at point F, and now there's a shift toward point H, and I think it's trying to isolate. I believe the answer is B. Let me just quickly show. So C. No, my bad. 1 second. Yeah, sorry. So like when there's in this case, there's been a change in the price of good X. There's been actually a decrease in the price of good X. That's why I got initially confused by B. But when there's a change in price and a subsequent change in the budget line, there's two effects that take place. There's the income effect, and then there's the substitution effect. And the substitution effect can be represented by a movement along the existing indifference curve to initial point before the movement from G to H reflects actually the increase in sort of real income that you have from the change in price. So F and G is initially a substitution effect whereby, excluding the fact that the decrease in price of X gives you more income. If we were to sort of hold utility fixed, the decrease in price of X makes X relatively better compared relatively cheaper compared to Y and therefore more desirable compared to Y. So we can see the answer is C. It's a substitution effect for a price fall in X. G to H is then the income effect for the price fall in X. Okay, question 6. Essentially, vertical integration is when a firm merges with its suppliers or its distributors, and therefore forms a bigger chain. So rather than a firm negotiating how much sort of supplies and resources to buy from primary producers and suppliers, they actually buy that firm, and all those decisions are made internally, which kind of lends itself to the answer being, I'm just going to check that 6 is B, yes. Because therefore there's a reduction in these costs where you have to start agreeing the contracts when you buy from suppliers. So all those decisions are made internally, and that reduces overall costs. Okay, question 7. The idea that the answer to this is a contestable market, because it's the idea that although there may be like a major, the organizers may be the sort of official monopoly or oligopoly or whatever, because there's essentially zero barriers to entry and exit. This is something you've got to Google. It's now sort of accessible market because it means that sort of unofficial companies and souvenir producers can come in and still sell the same product. That's why it's a contestable market. Okay, so question 8 is looking at the firm's short-run production function. When the idea, the distinction between short run and long run is crucial, and in the short run, it's the idea that factors of production are variable, but the state of technology is fixed. And then the distinction between the short run and the long run is in the long run, the state of technology is therefore variable. So for this question, we know the answer is B. Sorry, C. Because yeah, we know it's C. The state of technology is fixed in the short run. In the short run, also, I've got to clarify, it's not a case of all factors of production are variable. It's usually one of capital or labor are fixed, and therefore the other is variable. But definitely the state of technology is fixed in the short run, so 8 is C. Question 9. This can be quite a confusing one because you may start to kind of use these dotted lines to start working out average costs. But ultimately, it's quite difficult to determine. You can't really determine the average cost because that's actually the total cost divided by the total quantity, which is something that's not really displayed on this graph because you haven't been given any figures. However, what you can look at is the marginal cost, which can be reflected by the gradient of the total cost curve because it's the additional change in cost to an increase in quantity by 1 unit. As we can see, the gradient is at its lowest point at OQ2, and therefore the answer here is D for question 9. Okay, question 10. Here, because we are given figures, we can now look at average variable costs. We know initially that the fixed cost is $40. So when we have to firstly isolate the total variable cost, which is the difference between this initial 40 and then the subsequent amounts based on the amount of quantity. So when 4 units of good are being produced, we can see that the total fixed cost is still 40. The total cost is 80. So the total variable cost is, in this case, 80 minus 40, which is 40. And to work out the average variable cost, we divide it by the output. So it's 40 divided by 4 equals 10. So the answer 10 is A. I've already discussed the contestable market, so this is again something like just work off the definition, but in this case it's D because there's zero cost to entry or exit from the industry. Question 12. Yeah, I have found this actually quite a difficult one. But I think the way to look at it is initially you've got to realize it's the OQ is the profit maximizing output. And the key point of the profit maximizing output is for the firm's marginal revenue is equal to the firm's marginal cost. So we have to, at this point, Q, we have to sort of look because the MC curve, we have a variety of different MC curves that could be possible, but we need the point at which at the intersection of the marginal revenue and the marginal cost occurs at Q. And as we can see, this takes place with marginal cost curve C. As we can see with A, the MR and MC curves intersect here, which is below Q. Same with B. Meanwhile, with D, the MR and MC intersect beyond Q. It's only at C where the intersection takes place at the profit maximizing level of quantity. So in this case, the answer is C. Okay, 13. What is most likely to be found when comparing the long run equilibrium compared to that with perfect competition? 1 second, I missed this question. Okay, so the answer is actually quite simple. We know that in perfect competition, there's a zero profits are made because of any sort of abnormal profit is whittled down by the increase in suppliers coming into the market or say leaving the market in cases of loss. But the barriers to entry in monopolistic competition mean that this is not possible. So abnormal high level profits are made. So I believe the answer to 13 is B. Oh no. Oh no, that's not. Oh, sorry, no. Okay, this is actually my fault. It's not a monopoly per se. It's a monopolistic competition, and that's again similar to perfect competition, except there's a greater degree of product differentiation between. So yeah, I can see why the answer in this case is A, because of the degree of monopoly power each firm has, they have a degree of price setting power, whereas in perfect competition, the firms are immediately price takers. They have no degree to set their own prices. So therefore, output is actually restricted somewhat more in monopolistic competition because they can set slightly higher prices because the products are somewhat differentiated. In the case of perfect competition, there's no product differentiation, so they have to take the market price. So there's no excess capacity. They have to produce at the full level, which is not the case with monopolistic competition, where quantity is actually slightly reduced. Sorry for that. I misread monopoly there. That's my fault. Okay. 14. This can look like quite a difficult one, but I think the key word to look at is source. Imperfect information is a source of market failure because that leads to information asymmetries where one party knows more about a good than another, and that can lead to an inefficient market outcome and a market failure. The reason why the answer is income inequality is because income inequality per se is not a source of market failure. I mean, it's very likely that different people are going to earn different amounts of money when they go into the market. Hence, different markets pop up for different consumers and different income brackets. But income inequality is a product of market failure. I think that's really where people can get caught at. It's not a source, it's a product. Monopolies can be a source of market failure, as can non-excludability in the case of public goods. So the answer is B, income inequality. 15. Government wants to regulate consumption of the demerit good. I think it can be quite confusing to look at the marginal side of it, but you can essentially actually discount A and B initially because increases in net welfare especially are going to come from changes in the total benefits and the total costs, and we can clearly see the answer is D because if the costs fall by more than the benefits, and there's going to be a net benefit, i.e. a net increase in societal welfare. So 15 is D. 16, which measure is least likely to help with a household get out of the poverty trap? So the answer in this case is A, which I'll go on to last, but we can clearly see that B, for example, if you increase the threshold at which income tax is paid, it means that, say, originally if the threshold's 10,000, it implies that everyone who earns £10,000 or below doesn't pay income tax. If that's increased, say 12,000, that means these additional families who are earning 11,000, 11,500, who would have originally paid an income tax, they now don't, and that's more likely to help them get out of the poverty trap. So it's not B. Similarly, C is only going to increase the wages of those at the lower end of the labour market, so that's actually going to be quite helpful. Similarly, D, reducing the basic rate of income tax. It just means these low-income families have more of their income to then spend. The answer is actually A, because a change from universal benefit to means-tested benefit means that the benefit, rather than it just being universally provided to everyone, it's now only provided to those who can prove that their income and their means are insufficient or below a certain threshold that the government defines. Universal benefit implies everyone is entitled to this benefit, and by changing that, that means a lot of families who may still be stuck in the poverty trap, but are relatively better off than other families, may no longer qualify for this benefit, and therefore could be stuck in the trap. It's definitely not going to help households get out of the poverty trap. I'll say that. Okay, question 17. This is something you've got to learn out of a definition, but it's somewhat easy to deduce because it's talking about addition to revenue. So you immediately know it's not a cost thing, nor is it talking about a law. So it's a marginal, it's either marginal revenue or marginal revenue product. And we know that marginal revenue is the addition to revenue from an increase in quantity. And that's quantity of output. But this is not referring to that. It's referring to increasing quantity of an initial factor of production, which is the marginal revenue product. That's the definition of it. So you can actually deduce that the answer to 17 is C. 18. So if you just sort of Google economic rent, you can you'll be defined as something along the lines of sort of excess payment made to the producer above how much they were willing to supply it for. It actually ties hand in hand with the idea of producer surplus, and that's the way you should actually deal with this question. So we look at the first graph, we can see that there is a producer surplus of 1, and this is an excess payment. You can think of it as excess payment because the payment is made at the market price, but all these producers over here, they'd be willing to supply they're willing to hire. This is in terms of the labour market. So the supply is actually workers who are looking to get hired. As we can see, there are some workers who are willing to work at quite low prices, low wages, but the market wage that's charged is up here. So there is an excess payment made to these workers who are suppliers of labour. So we can see 1 should be part of it, which means you can cut out C and D immediately. And similarly, if we look at the third diagram, if we can see this sort of supply curve here, the going wage is here, but there's quite a few suppliers down here who workers who'd be willing to work at this sort of labour, this sort of wage rate, but they get paid the market equilibrium wage rate, which is an excess payment over what they would be willing to work for. So 4. So the answer in this case is B for 18, 1 and 4. Okay, question 19. This should be a fairly simple question because we essentially need to work out labour cost per unit of output. The labour cost is pretty simple. It's just 50 times how many workers are employed. So we know in the case when one is employed, that's $50, and then the per unit of output portion. So we know the labour cost per unit of output with 1 worker is 5. With 2 workers, it's also 5. With 3 workers, it's 150 divided by 40, which is just less than 4. With 4 workers, it's 200 divided by 50, which equals 4. And with 5 workers, it's 250 divided by 60, which is just over 4. So we actually know the answer to 19 is B, if I'm correct. Yeah, it's 3 workers, because that's the point at which the labour cost per unit of output is at its lowest. It's just under 4 in that case. Okay, question 20. This is something you should probably just be able to logically deduce. So if people are working overtime, generally overtime pay is at the same hourly rate as standard pay. It just means people's average incomes are going to increase, but the hourly wage will stay the same. They might potentially increase. So the answer, like deducibly, is C. It's definitely not B. It actually could well be the opposite. Actually, that's the way in which the aggregate supply curve's upward slope works. It increases in, say, overtime pay when resources are like overworked, means that you have to sort of pay higher rates, and therefore prices and inflation increase. So it's not B, nor is it A. And it's in terms of rapid growth of output to productivity, I don't think that's something you can necessarily deduce just from overtime. So the answer is definitely C. Common characteristic of developing countries, I believe in this case it's extensive underemployment. 21B, yes. And because in this case, underemployment differs from unemployment in that it really pertains towards workers who either are high-skilled workers who are working in quite low-skilled jobs and industries, or workers who are working part-time but would wish to work full-time. And I think a lot of the nature of the work in developing countries, it's not your quite like high-tech, high-skilled tertiary sector work that you get in developed countries. It's still a lot of manufacturing or construction. There can be a lot of underemployment of people's skills because the work is relatively mundane and not very like intellectually taxing, despite the potential of the workers to be able to work in more demanding industries. So in this case, the answer to 21 is B. 22, this is actually pretty simple, to be honest. You can literally work it out from one of them. I mean, in the least developed countries, you're probably going to have the most rural area percentage. So it's immediately looking like it's D, and we can see that lowest number of years of schooling education, lowest GDP per capita, and lowest life expectancy. Yeah, so the answer is D for 22. If the marginal propensity to consume is greater than 1. In this case, so as a consumer, you've got two options when you earn your income. You can either consume or you can save. So although conceptually it's quite weird, if your marginal propensity to consume is greater than 1, it implies you're consuming more. It implies that your marginal propensity to save would have to be negative. And what that means is you're having to borrow money, and then you're using that borrowed money to then fund consumption. So this would be an example when, say, you're in a given time period, you're purchasing a house. If your expenditure, given the loan you'll take out, your expenditure will be like you'll have to borrow so much money that your consumption will be greater than income, or the additional consumption would be greater than the additional income you earn, if that sort of makes sense. That's why it's not A, because the key thing with marginal propensity to consume, it's not in terms of total amount, it's in terms of the additional amount spent. So you can very easily deduce from marginal propensity to consume, marginal propensity to save, but you can't necessarily deduce total spending and total earnings. That's why the answer in the case is D. Net leakages. So we know it's quite simple to work out which of these sort of components is the injection and which is the leakage. So we know exports minus imports. Exports is money coming in, imports is money coming out. So a trade surplus is actually a net injection, not leakage. So it should be a cross there. Similarly, but a budget deficit, government spending is money coming out, whereas going in, well, tax is money coming out. So that's actually a net injection. Leakage is actually all the net money coming out of the economy. So that should also be a cross. Private sector surplus, we know savings is money going out and investment is money coming in. So that quantity, in which case if it's positive, that is a net leakage. So this should be a tick. So the answer to 24 should be D. Okay, 25. This just requires going through it a bit, looking at the and the key thing to look at is with it's because it's marginal percentage to consume. You have to look at the increments between income and expenditure. So it's quite easy with the income wise because it's always increasing linearly by 100. But we can see that initially, as income increases by 1,000, consumption increases by 950, so that's an MPC of 0.95. For the next increment, 1,000 increase leads to a 900 increase. So it was 0.95, now it's 0.9. Using the same logic, we can see next step is 0.85. Next step is 0.8. Yes. And this final one, I can tell you it's less than 0.8. One sec. Yeah, I can tell you that it's definitely less than 0.8, i.e., the MPC has been decreasing from 2,000 to 7,000. So we can see the answer is B, falls continuously. Increase in transactions demand for money. So there's two components of demand for money. There's the transactions demand and then the speculative demand. The transaction demand is the answer is B, because if there's an increase in income, it means that you're going to make more transactions. So there's an increase in demand for, say, holding money to fund these transactions, because money is used as a medium exchange, right? So the transactions demand links to income. The other component, which is the speculative demand for money, that's the return that can be earned on money instruments like bonds and stocks or whatever, compared to cold hard cash. So that's why it's not an increase in the rate of interest. Transaction demand is to do with income, so the answer is B. 27, advisors disagree over the relative impact of fiscal and monetary controls. What is likely to be the first stage at which a time lag occurs? I was quite confused by this question, to be honest. My logic, like in terms of just pure logic, I would say, given that it's talking about a disagreement over the relative impact, then the first time lag will occur in the selection of the appropriate policy, because clearly there's no consensus on what the appropriate policy is. So you can see why the answer is D. Of course, I think you just got to really, it's not really testing your economic knowledge here. It's just notice this disagreement. But I mean, A, there's a time lag. B, there's a time lag. I don't think C is particularly relevant, because I don't think there's necessarily a time lag involved here, though that is a stage that occurs before the selection of the policy. So in this case, just work with the question and select D. 28, this is actually pretty simple. We know, we can just think historically there's been a vast increase in the amount of fossil fuel consumption, just to boot power all this increased manufacturing and industry that's taking place across the globe. We have seen increased urbanization to do with this increased manufacturing. And there's been increased pollution. There's definitely not been decreased international trade. We've seen increased globalization and interdependence between countries. So it's actually the opposite. So the answer in this case is B. 29, which policy pursued by the central bank represents contractionary monetary policy? It's definitely not a reduction in interest rates. It's definitely not a reduction in the minimum cash deposit ratio of banks, because if that ratio falls, it means that banks can therefore actually lend more of their deposits out in terms of loans, and therefore that can actually stimulate the economy, and that's actually an expansionary policy. The answer is actually in this case D, because you think of sale of government bonds in the open market, but by the central bank, that's essentially them taking money out of the system, because the sale of government bonds will be purchased by private investors and banks and financial intermediaries who use money in the economy to buy these government bonds. This money goes to the central bank, who then stores it. So you can think of it akin to money being taken out of the economy, and therefore a contractionary monetary policy. So the answer in that case is D. And finally, 30, yeah, this is just quite simple. Public finances is to do with government spending and taxation, so it's fiscal policy B. Yeah, and that's it. Okay, I hope you found that okay. Sorry, there's a few questions that I myself initially got wrong, but I hope I've corrected them and ironed that one out. And if you've got any questions, please let me know on Trello. Okay, thank you.